Should hold it too.
Go ahead. Today is February 4th, 2024. We're here to interview Sonia Langbert, who is a survivor of the Holocaust. The interview is done under the auspices of the Shoah Foundation, and it will be deposited in the archives of the Shoah Foundation and the Montreal Holocaust Museum. The interviewer is Esther Ander, and the videographer is Robert Wilson.
It's a beautiful sunny day, so
So, good morning, Sonia. Thanks for agreeing to be interviewed.
thank you.
My first question is if you could tell your name and spell both of them, first and last name.
Okay. Sonia, Sonja, Rotenberg, Rotenberg, Langbert, Langburt.
And could you tell me when you were born?
I was born May the 11th, 1943.
And where?
Siberia. I don't remember exactly which city, but I know it was in the coldest part of Siberia. And it sounds like Syktyvkar. And when we came to Canada, we weren't allowed to say that we were in Russia. So my mother picked a name that was very close to where I was born, and that was Kirov. So I don't know if there's a similar city in Russia or not, Siberia.
And it was in the Komi SSR.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll go back a little bit before your time. What do you know of your paternal grandparents?
My grandfather died when he was helping with the cholera in 1918. And my father was an orphan at a very young age. And he lived in Slavittich. And he was sent to learn a trade to Warsaw. And he lived with an aunt and uncle. And my father was very, very disillusioned with religion. And he refused to pray every day. And his uncle was very angry with him. And when he would go to bed at night, it was obviously very cold and they were very poor, even in Warsaw. So if my aunt, his auntie would cover him, the uncle would take off the blanket very angry and say, "We don't have to cover this Gentile. He can live here without a blanket." His kids needed it more than, well, he was not a happy child. He had a difficult childhood. And when he got older, he and his brother rented a place. They must have been in their teens. And they were working. My father was a metal worker. And he was apprenticed there where he was taught his trade. And his mother, she had a store and she dealt in yard goods. And she would come periodically to Warsaw to buy yard goods for the shop, and she would see her children. And he had a younger sister. He never ever talked about her. All he talked about was he went to the river to try to get them across the river to go and run away with him. And my father's mother, refused to go. So obviously they were killed.
In the war.
Yeah.
The brother that was with him in Warsaw, what was his name?
His name was Aaron.
So that was Aaron.
Yes.
They ran away with him to
They ran. Yeah, I don't know how they did it, but my father was very industrious, and he managed to get transportation. They ran away, the whole family.
We'll come to that a little later. Did your father tell you anything about his apprentice years when he was apprenticed to the metal workshop?
He just told me that to pass the grade, he had to make a copper teapot. And he was very proud of this copper teapot. And that's all he talked about.
Do you know if he did any schooling? Not apprenticeship, but schooling to write and math?
Not that I know of. But you know what? He was very learned. He spoke many languages. He read all the newspapers. And maybe when he was very young, before he was sent away, he was taught how to pray. But other than that, I don't think he had any school because he was sent away. He was 7 years old.
What languages did he speak?
I'm sorry?
What languages did he speak? You said he spoke many languages.
He spoke Polish, Russian, German, Swedish, English, French.
And Yiddish.
And of course, Yiddish.
That was his mother tongue.
Yeah.
You didn't mention your grandfather's and grandmother's name.
My grandfather's name was Hirsch, and my grandmother's name was Fradel.
Langbert?
No, Rothenberg.
No,
Rothenberg. And I know my grandmother's maiden name was Saperstein. Oh, and I never found any family of Saperstein.
And do you know by any chance, did your father know what his father did before he died?
I have no idea. I have no idea. But there was a funny story. I don't even know if I should put it into this. My father's grandfather lived with my grandmother. They lived in one house, and it was a big house with a divider. And his other daughter lived with her husband in that other house. And as long as my grandfather was alive, he told his daughter, don't ever move the divider, because if I die, his son-in-law is going to try to kick you out. And that's what happened.
The son-in-law was
his daughter's
husband.
Yeah.
So it was, the two daughters, right?
The two daughters, yeah. But she was with the husband, and my grandmother was alone. So they lived in the bigger house, and of course the other one wanted the bigger house.
And what else did your father tell you about his years as a young boy in the uncle and aunt's family?
That's the only thing he ever said. He never, I guess he couldn't wait to leave. The auntie was good to him, but not the uncle. And I don't even know if the auntie was the aunt or the uncle was the uncle. I have no idea. Never talked about it.
Has he ever mentioned their names?
No.
And do you know how old he was when he went off with his brother to rent?
I imagine he must have been 16, 17 years old. I don't even know who was older, my father or his brother.
Let's go on to your maternal grandparents. What were they called?
My grandfather was Yankel, and my grandmother was Gietel. And the only reason why I remember is because all the kids are named.
Their last name?
Schoenfeld.
Which is
Szajnfeld.
And where were they from?
Warsaw. They lived in Warsaw.
And what do you know about them? Did you know them?
Did I know them?
Sorry.
No. I just, the stories that my parents used to say, my grandfather used to rent orchards in the summer. Well, he rented them in the winter, hoping that they can plant and it'll be good in the summer. And if they had a good season, then they made money. And if they didn't have a good season, then they lost money if the crop was not good. And all of my parents' friends, I mean, the pictures that I have when they were teenagers, all of my parents' friends used to go there because it was like going to the country here. They would go there and enjoy being out in the country, the good fresh air, and the food was good, and the camaraderie was good.
So, last question concerning the grandparents is what happened to them during the war? Your mother's parents.
I presume they went into the ghetto and then they went to Treblinka. But we have no idea.
You never found any trace?
No. No. I know that my mother's brother next in line to her, the oldest brother, went back to try to get them to go out, to leave. And by the time they got back to Warsaw from Siberia, not from Siberia, from running away, whatever city they were in, they were captured and put into the ghetto also. So my uncle and his wife or fiance also perished.
That was your uncle?
My mother's brother.
Moishe, right?
Moishe, yeah.
So let's talk about your parents. What was your mother's name?
Esther, Ester.
And when was she born?
1912.
In Warsaw.
In Warsaw, yes.
What kind of a person was she and what did she look like? Describe her to me.
You know what? I never ever heard my mother complain. She was always singing. And she had a very happy disposition. She was not materialistic, but she worked very hard all her life. And basically, a Zionist from the beginning. And it was interesting because my mother was Poel Zion, Zionist, and my father was a Bundist. And when we came to Canada, the only place the two organizations would meet were in my parents' house. Otherwise, they were, totally different. But I don't know how my parents met, but it was truly, truly a love affair. And they got married in 1935.
Can you describe her appearance? How did she dress? What kind of,
Well, my mother was a seamstress, a dressmaker, and she was, when she was young, she was fashionable because this was her job. And of course, as she got older, and when I was young and silly, she didn't dress the way my friends' parents dress. But she also put on weight. But in her time, she was very fashionable. I'll show you a picture where she's walking down the street with my father, and this is when they were engaged.
Do you know what kind of education she had?
Probably also grade school and a trade school.
You said that she was a Zionist. Was she also religious?
No. Her parents were very religious, and there was one one Yom Kippur, and my grandmother must have noticed that somebody had eaten, and it would not dawn on her that her wonderful sons or her other daughter would have eaten it. It was only my mother that was blamed for it, and it wasn't her. And no, she was very Yiddish, very Jewish, kept a kosher home. Even in Russia, when food was very scarce, she did not eat things that, as much as possible, that weren't kosher, or like animal food. And no, she was, like I said, very, very Yiddish, very Jewish, very proud of her heritage, and taught us to be the same. And
What language did you speak at home with your parents, with your husband, your father?
I guess in Russia we spoke Russian. When we got to the DP camp, we spoke German. In Sweden, all the people that were there were from Poland that we associated with, so we spoke Polish. And when we came to Canada, my mother said, this is one language that we will not speak. From now on, we speak only Yiddish. Until my parents passed away, I spoke only Yiddish at home.
And when, so I guess her parents' mother tongue would have been Yiddish.
Yes.
So they spoke Yiddish. And when you were in Siberia with them,
They
spoke
spoke
in Russian or in Yiddish?
They must have spoken Russian. I was too young to remember.
Tell me about her siblings. How many siblings did she have?
She had a younger sister and 3 younger brothers.
Their names?
Her sister was Dvora, and her brother was Moshe and Henoch, and the youngest brother was Israel.
So what I was saying was that we'll talk about what happened to her siblings when we get to your story. So let's go on to your father. What was his name?
Anshel, Anczel, and his brother's name was Aaron, and his sister was Sarah.
When was she born? When was he born and where?
1910 in Slavitic.
Did your parents, so your parents married in 35?
Yes.
And you have a brother.
My brother was born in 1936, in June of 1936, and his name was Herman Hersch, after the grandfather.
What did your parents tell you about their life before the war in Warsaw?
You know what? They had a very social life because they belonged to these organizations. They were very active. And you know what? They both worked. They were both, productive. My mother continued working. My father worked. And they had a good life. Until the bombing started.
What kind of apartment did they have, do you know?
I have no idea. They never talked about it.
And do you know if your mother worked for someone or she was her own employer as a seamstress?
I don't know, and I'm sure she was her own, but she never talked about it.
So tell me what happened when the war broke out. What did they do? What happened to them?
Well, when the war broke out, my grandparents' house was one of the first that was bombed. So my father gathered the family from both sides, and they all left. My mother's sister, 3 brothers, my father's brother, they all left. I don't know exactly what town they went to, but they went to a town where obviously people were going, and they knew people, and they were going from town to town. And my mother's oldest brother decided, I think I mentioned that, he wanted to go back to Warsaw to get his parents because he felt very uncomfortable being there. And the ghetto was already open, and they took him into the ghetto. But the rest of the family afterwards were all shipped to Siberia. So at some point, they were all together in the same place in Siberia.
You You mentioned that little story with your grandparents, how they didn't want your brother to go. Remember? What was that?
Okay, when my parents were running away initially, they said, "You don't know where you're going. Leave Herman here, and if it's possible that it's good there, you'll come back and get him." And my father and mother said, "No, we're not leaving the child. He was 3 years old. We're not leaving him here." And that was their luck and my brother's luck, because they had perished.
And you mentioned another little episode when your father was locked up.
My father was locked up in a synagogue, and my mother would bring him food. And I don't know how it happened or what happened, but my father was released, and I understand that the synagogue was burnt after. So I don't know if the people were still in it, but my father got out.
That was already in Ukraine, somewhere in
Yeah,
Portugal.
either he escaped or he was able to maybe bribe one of the guards, but he got out. And then they ran away to the next stop.
Do you know how, I mean, we're talking about like many people with children. Do you know how they traveled before they were picked up by the authorities?
I imagine it was with a horse and buggy. I have no idea. I mean, it wasn't a train, and they certainly didn't have cars, so that's what I, but they were all together. They were all together till Siberia.
Okay, so now is a good time, I think, to go through the sibling story. So Moshe is the one who went back.
Moshe went back,
What
yes.
happened to Hanyek and Israel?
Hanyek was with them, and Israel and Dvorah were with him. And Hanyek was he was with them the whole time. And when they formed Anders' Polish army, so my uncle went to the Polish army, and he was sent off to Italy.
Stop it.
It's a cell phone, it's okay.
Oh, wait until. So Hanyek went to the Anders army, and then what?
And he was sent to Monte Cassino in Italy. And I understand there was very bad fighting there. In Monte Cassino, a lot of people were killed. And after the war, he went to Israel and joined the IDF, or the Israeli army at the time. And he stayed in Israel till we made him papers to come to Canada. He and his wife and his daughter.
How about Israel?
Israel was 18 years old. He lived with my parents and my brother. And they came looking for my mother's sister. The NKVD used to knock on the door in the middle of the night, and she wasn't there. So they took whoever was there, and her brother was there. And they never saw him, never heard from him again, could not find any trace of him. My mother, all her life, was looking for her brother. He was only 18. And my mother's sister married a man that she met in Siberia. And at the end of the war, his sister had managed to survive, and she was in Italy. And he wanted to go to his sister in Italy. And my father was begging her. My father looked like a very tough, gruff guy, but he was very, very soft. And he was begging her, "We survived a war together. You're with your sister. You don't know where you're going. Why are you going?" Anyway, she went with her husband, and a soldier was cleaning his gun, and it fired, killed her, I think, and 2 other people. And she's buried in Innsbruck in the church cemetery. But I have pictures of her gravesite. My parents used to go, and they paid for the upkeep of the cemetery, and all my kids went to visit.
How about your father's siblings? What happened to Aaron?
He and his girlfriend, fiance, also escaped with my parents. And they were all together in Siberia. And I guess he went somewhere else in Siberia and he died of some disease. And I, my father never knew. I mean, we were very much in touch with his sister-in-law, but she never told him. Maybe she didn't know a precise date when he died. So he died in Siberia, buried in Siberia, but we don't know when and where.
Let's get back to your parents. So they're picked up by the Soviet authorities to be deported. What did they tell you about the train ride to Siberia?
There was no food. And the only thing that they were able to get is, I don't even know what it's called. They would get the hot water from the steam engine. So they had hot water to drink. And I don't know how long it took. I mean, they must have taken some food with them because they had nothing. And people died on the way also. And they got to the place where they had to be. It was very, very, very cold. But my mother always said the Russian people were very helpful. I mean, obviously the ones that were there were prisoners from another time, because who would go to Siberia? So they were very helpful, they were very kind, they were very, very good. But the government was not.
Did they tell you anything about the train or the wagons that they went in to Siberia?
Cattle wagons. Yeah.
And do you know what season they went? You said it was really cold. Did they go? I mean, they
Well,
ran
the war
away.
started in September, so this must have been already October, November, December. It was cold. It was cold.
And when they arrived to wherever they arrived, was it a town or was it a camp in the forest?
I think it might have been more of a town. I'm not sure, because the Russian soldiers were there. So it must have been more inhabited than the forest. And my father worked in the bakery there. And my mother sewed for the officers' wives. So she sewed. I mean, they really needed fancy clothes in Siberia. So my mother sewed.
Did you get paid for it?
She got paid in food. She got paid in food. So everybody knew, because my father worked in the bakery and my mother was able to get not much, but there was a basket near the door, and if whoever was hungry would come and take food from the basket. And this my brother told me. And he says one day they all came home and everything was stolen.
From their home?
From their home, yeah. All the food, everything was stolen.
And they never found out who stole?
No.
And did your father take bread from the bakery?
What happened when they started to work there, the head of the bakery said, I'm not going to watch you and you don't watch me. I'm putting a loaf of bread here on my stomach, under my clothes, and I won't search you if you do the same. And this is how we survived. Otherwise, my mother used to say if she stood in line for any food, because they would announce they have this and this day, she would come after hours, she would come to the front of the line and be pushed to the back. My mother was not a fighter. She was, like I said, she was a gentle person.
Who were the other prisoners there? Did they meet, did they know anybody apart from the family among the prisoners?
Well, our immediate family was there.
Yeah, but apart from them?
There was one man that liked me and I liked him. So he took care of me when I was little and my mother was working. I'm trying to remember his name. Judgechaya or something, like a real Russian name. Russian. But the Russian, they became friendly with the Russian people.
You said that your parents spoke Russian. Where did they learn Russian from? In Warsaw, they didn't speak Russian.
In Siberia,
So they picked this up there.
yeah. It's not much different than Polish. It's different, but
And what kind of accommodation did they have in this town?
like everybody else, a barrack, a hut. It wasn't first class, business class.
But you don't know if it was like a hut or if they had a house or a room in a.
I think they had a room. Yeah, I think they had a one room, and everybody was in the one room, because my uncle lived with them too. So
Israel.
yeah,
And Dvora also.
Dvora, after she moved in with her husband. That's why when they came for her to my parents, she wasn't there.
And do you know how they heated? How they combated cold?
No idea. No idea. They never talked about it. I mean, I just have pictures of, not of my mother, but of my father going to work with that fur cap, and he used to call the jacket a fafaika.
Pufaika.
Fafaika. You know, the words come back from hearing them.
What kind of food did they have? They had bread? What kind of food did your mother get for her sewing?
The most important thing was the bread. She doesn't talk. I know that she didn't get milk when I was born. So my brother must have been in a kinderheim, because he spoke Russian too.
But was he living in the kinderheim or was he at home?
You know what? He didn't talk about it. My parents didn't talk about it. I don't know.
Do you know if they went hungry or if they had enough food because they were
No.
fighters, bakers?
No, they always went hungry. Because my mother used to say in Yiddish, like I said, my mother, as she got older, she got a little bit heavier, and she said, I suffered enough from hunger in my life. I don't have to suffer from hunger. In Sweden and in Canada, I can eat whatever I want.
You were born there in 1943.
43, yes.
Yes. Have you heard anything about the circumstances of your birth?
Nothing. All they ever talked about was they took my father into the army when I was 10 days old, and my mother was left in Siberia. And in May, I'm presuming there's still snow and cold, with 2 children. And my father, I don't know how long, I think it was 2 weeks, he ran away from the army, which was a death sentence in Russia, and managed to come back. And he went back into the bakery. And the liberation was not much, you know. The war ended, you know, very soon after.
How come that they didn't go after him from the army, take him back? Or
Maybe because my mother was very close with the officers' wives. So that could be a reason. But they never said. That could have been a reason why they took him into the army. And also that could be a reason why he wasn't punished for running away.
And when you were there in Siberia little, did you get any illnesses, any sicknesses that you know of?
I had, when I was very little, I had 3 at the same time. I'm not sure which, but I know it was whooping cough and diphtheria. I don't know what the third one was, but I was very, very sick, and there was nothing my parents could do. So they found a doctor there, and the doctor told my mother, she's going to die, she's dying, don't waste your energy. and your money on her because there's no chance that she's going to survive. Spend it more on your living son. And I kind of proved them wrong. And every day I say every year is a bonus.
You mentioned that your mother was working. You mentioned that there was someone who looked after you. Did he look after you the whole time, like those 2 years?
I think so. This Russian man, he was like an old grandfather from what I understand. And I guess his wife. Because they liked us, they helped us, and we obviously liked them too. Because I called him grandfather. Judge is the grandfather in Russian? I'm not sure.
Can't remember.
I don't remember either, but he was like a grandfather.
And you were there until when? When would you leave?
I'm not sure when, but I know that we were in Sweden in 1948. So liberation was 45. And then we went back to Warsaw to see if there was anybody alive. And there wasn't. So we left right away.
What was the journey back from Siberia to Warsaw like?
Also by train. Also by train.
Do you have any memories as
No.
a child?
No.
Any smells, any sounds?
No. Nothing. So I must have been about 2 years old or, yeah. Or
Did
no.
your brother ever tell you any stories about it, or your parents?
No.
So you went back to Warsaw?
We went back to Warsaw. We found no family. My mother always said things were so bad in Siberia. So she always said throughout the time in Warsaw, I can't wait to see my parents. If they knew what we went through, they would never believe the hardship that we went through. And when they came to Warsaw and found out what happened there, I mean, they were devastated, absolutely devastated.
If you think of the stories that your parents told you about Siberia, what did they say was the hardest?
I think the cold and the hunger, mostly the hunger. And they had, because my father worked in the bakery and my mother sewed, they had more than a lot of other people. And that's why they shared. You know, this my brother told me, and my parents always said the basket with the bread. Because there were people that were very, very hungry.
Did your brother share any stories with you from Siberia that you haven't told me yet?
He was very, very quiet. When he got sick and he was in palliative care, I interviewed him to talk about his life. And I just spoke to my nephew, and he has the map where he knew where they went, and he has the statement that he made.
Maybe that would be interesting to include.
Yeah, I'll try to get it from him, get copies of it from him.
That would be great,
Yeah.
So you're back in Warsaw and your parents decide to leave. How do they leave and where do they go? Where does your family go?
They knew they weren't staying in Poland, and they tried to get the closest, I guess, like everybody else, to the American zone. And I asked my brother, and he said, we walked a lot. I mean, my brother and my husband have flashbacks when they see the refugees running with their packages. He said, that was us. And they crossed the borders. My brother would carry me. My mother carried whatever she could. And one border, I don't know which one, we were smuggled out in an ambulance. Excuse me. This is what my brother told me. Because I said, how did you get from one place to the other? And then we ended up in a DP camp at Reichenhall.
By Reichenhall?
Yeah. I always thought it was Austria, but I guess very close to the border.
Very close, yeah. It's very close to
Excuse me.
Salzburg, yeah, in Germany. So you arrived in Bad Reichenhall in 1945. Tell me about the conditions there. What kind of living conditions you found?
We lived in barracks, and they were run by kibbutzim. So the head of the kibbutz was the whole who ran it. And my parents got, they were in a barrack, but it was a long barrack with other people. But we were the only family with 2 children. So my father put up a wall. And when the head of the kibbutz came and saw it, he says, I want it for my family. And they kicked my parents and us out. And we were in line waiting to go to Israel, to be smuggled to Israel, because the British didn't allow any ships in. So after we were kicked out of there, my father said, I am not going to Israel. I'm going to any other country, but not Israel. Well,
You had tickets though, right, to go to Israel. What's the story of that?
I don't know if we were supposed to go on the Exodus. And my father was very handy with his hands. He was a metal worker. He was strong, from forced labor also. And they wanted him to stay in the kibbutz to help out in the kibbutz. So we were supposed to be on the Exodus. There was room for my mother, my brother, and myself. And my father said, there's no way. We survived a war together. We will stay together. And we didn't go. And, not everybody on the Exodus were lucky enough to get to Israel. It was.
Once when you were kicked out of your nice little divided room, where did you stay?
We stayed in another cabin.
But with other people, he didn't.
Yeah, with other people. We were just waiting where to go, what to do, and I remember in front of the cabin, it was grass. It wasn't a park or anything, grass, and somebody had a car, and he taught my father how to drive there. So it must have been one of the Israeli shlichim. My father learned how to drive in Germany in those days. And then a cousin who they had never met, my father's cousin, they just knew the names, even though the small towns were near each other, but families didn't travel unless they lived in the same town. So he found out our name was on a list, and he was able to make us papers to come to Sweden. And he survived the war. He and his wife, and his son is a year younger than I am, so he was born in hiding. He survived, he was saved. They had a factory that made brick for buildings. And they signed off all their property, everything that they had. They were a very comfortable family before the war. Signed it off to the people that saved them. And I don't know how they got to Sweden. I have to check their testimony. And when they found us, they made us papers to come to Sweden.
Where were they originally from? What town?
Partsev.
Before we go to Sweden, I still wanted to ask a few more questions about the DP camp. You told about the barracks. What did your parents do? I mean, you were there for a few years. Do you know what they did?
I guess my mother sewed whatever had to be done, and my father worked because they didn't want him to leave. So, obviously he worked. And I remember, and I have pictures, they took me to a museum, and the rumor was there was a huge regal chair there made out of silver. And they said that this was Hitler's chair. I mean, not his hideout, but this was one of the places that he used to go for rest and recreation, was right near Bad Reichenhall. So, very possible. And my parents became friends with a very fine artist who liked me a lot, and he painted me and became quite well known. But we lost contact with him completely until just a few years ago. I found out they lived across the street from my parents, and none of us knew.
You were about 2, 3, 4 years old in the DP camp. Who looked after you? And where were you during the day?
I have no idea. I don't remember any school, because the first school that I went to was in Sweden. I don't remember any school at all.
Do you remember any other kids?
No. Well, it's strange, eh? I don't remember any other children. I don't.
How about your brother? What did he do while your parents were busy?
I think maybe my brother might have gone to school. Maybe.
Do you remember food in the DP camp? What you ate?
All I remember was the American Army gave us Carnation milk, peanut butter, and Spam, and mayonnaise. For whatever reason, none of us wanted to eat any of it. So I think my father must have sold it on the black market to get real food for us. That's all I remember. The Carnation milk was very, very sweet. And we must have tried it. And the peanut butter, I mean, to look at it, nobody wanted to eat it. It's a very American thing.
Do you have any smell memories from the DP camp? Anything that stands out in your memory?
No.
Anything else that comes to mind that you didn't share with me?
From the DP camp?
Yeah, from the DP camp.
No, did I tell you anything else before?
No, I don't remember, but that's I'm
Yeah,
asking.
no.
How did you get to Sweden from there? Do you remember?
I'm assuming it was by boat, but I don't remember. I don't remember.
And where in Sweden? did you go?
Uppsala. We went to Uppsala.
That's where the cousin.
Yes, yeah. So we were in Uppsala, and I guess it must have been an apartment house, because all the refugees lived in the same house, a few families, and there was no room for us, so we lived in the carriage house in the back. And I tell my children, my grandchildren, it was so cold, and there was no, I mean, it was in the woods. The bathroom was outside, of course, and it was so cold that inside the walls in the winter had like green ice. Like when you go to the Laurentians and there's water that freezes over on the rocks, that's what we had inside the house. So we lived like that for quite a while. And then my cousins got papers to go to Canada, so we got room in the other house. So I don't know if it was a house apartment or one big house that was divided into rooms.
And this carriage house you lived in, how big was this and how many rooms did you have?
One room.
One room.
One room. We all slept in one room.
Why did you do the cooking?
My mother had a little hot plate. She worked in a factory there. And my father worked in a factory.
In Uppsala?
In Uppsala.
What kind of factory?
I think it was a factory that made textiles. And to me it seemed like every week. We went 1 week to the American consulate and 1 week to the Canadian. 1 week to the American. The Americans had a quota, and the Canadians had none is too many. So whichever one would take us first, that's what happened. And when my parents would go to Uppsala, we would go there by train, and I was very little, but Sweden was very safe and we were told if you need to go to the bathroom or if you need a drink or if you're hungry, just open any door and you can go in. So my parents felt very safe, and they would leave me in the park. And I would play a little girl with little blonde curls, and I always had a kokarde, like a ribbon in my hair. And there was a man on horseback coming towards me, and where he stopped the horse and he gave me little black candies, anise candies, and then he picked me up and he put me on the horse and we went around the park, and I found out it was the King of Sweden. So I always had a great respect and fondness of Sweden. Unfortunately, it's been changing in the last few years.
That was though not in Uppsala, right? But in Stockholm.
That was in Stockholm, yeah.
Yeah. And what did you do? I mean, you were there between the ages of 4 and 8, so I assume you went to school.
I went to a nursery school. That's the only school I went to there. And I think it was okay. I learned how to speak Swedish. Oh, the other thing that I forgot to mention also, I refused to eat. I mean, I was a very, you can't tell by looking at me, I was a very bad eater. And this school sent me to a hospital to be tested. And it was an older man, the doctor, and from my understanding today, they must have been testing my thyroid, because I remember tubes and things in my mouth. And he just looked at my mother and he said, just give her whatever she wants. The only thing that I would consume was tea, hot tea. So I would put a half a glass of sugar and the rest of the glass water. So in Russia, we always drank in a glass. So he said, whatever she wants, just give her. This is probably what her body demands. So that I remember. And I remember going to a camp during the summer because my mother was working. And my mother was so worried that I was supposed to die. So I'll die of hunger there. And my brother would come by bicycle. My brother was going to school there already. And he would come by bicycle to bring me especially strawberries, which I still love today, and bring me food. And I knew where to meet him at the fence. So he talked about it, and I'm speaking about it too. He always took care of me. My brother started school there. He was very, very smart, very athletic. He was petrified of heights. And one of the things that he went to school by bike or in the winter skis. And one of the things that they had to pass in order to graduate to the next level, they had to dive from a building into the river. And this is like a known thing that they do in Uppsala. Anyway, he did it and he passed. And
so your parents worked. Who took you to the nursery school?
I guess my mother must have taken me, or my father, or my brother went to school, so it had to be one of my parents.
And what else do you remember of the nursery school? You remember you didn't eat? What else? Who were the other little kids there?
Well, my friend Paula from Montreal, her brother was in my class, and another a young kid that was in my class. His name is Chaim Adler, and he became my daughter's grade 11 high school math teacher. And she claims she can't do math, and she got top marks in math in high school, but she can't do math, and he called her that she had a phobia against math.
Was it all Jewish children?
No, we were the only 3 Jewish children.
And were the others refugees or just regular
No, Swedish from Uppsala. And everybody had a name like Johansson or Svensson, or we were the only Jewish kids.
And who were the kindergarten or nursery school teachers?
Swedish. And December the 12th is Santa Lucia Day, which is very much, excuse me,
So what's Santa Lucia Day?
Santa Lucia is a very, very Nordic, very popular holiday. And they picked me as this little fairy, and I wore a wreath on my head with candles, walking down. The only Jewish girl was Santa Lucia. And they serve hot cross buns. And it's still a holiday. I mean, we don't celebrate it here, but it's still a holiday.
You said that there were other refugees there.
Yes.
They lived in
Yes.
that building. Did your parents make any friends with them?
Yes, of course.
So,
And my brother had his bar mitzvah there. And it was in a clubhouse. He had his bar mitzvah, and the whole building. I mean, Paula lived there, and my cousins lived there. Their cousins, who were hidden with them in Poland, also were in that house. So we were all together and remained in contact even in Canada, whoever came to Canada.
all the refugees there were Jewish refugees?
Yes. Some went to United States, and the ones that came to Canada, we stayed friends till now even.
And you remember who your parents' friends were there beside the cousins?
I remember the names. One name I remember, Binder, but they moved to the United States and we didn't know what city.
How about the Jewish community of Uppsala? What was that like?
It was small. It was small. We didn't know. I think the whole Jewish community were refugees that came, but they weren't all in Uppsala. There were refugees in Gothenburg. There were refugees in Stockholm. But I think I told you, Rabbi Kahani here told me that the reason why you went to Uppsala is because they didn't want too many Jewish people in Stockholm. But we never felt any anti-Semitism then. They were very good, gracious to us.
But the Jewish, so you say there were no local Jews there before the refugees in Uppsala?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. Because Sweden after the war took in refugees that went in they came from the camps, they went to the hospitals there. Uppsala, I don't remember having hospitals with refugees. They needed labor people in the factories, so most of the people that we knew lived, worked in the factories.
And did they build a synagogue or something, the refugees, or where were the...
No, it was just the bar mitzvah. It was just symbolic. I don't think my brother knew then 2 words of Hebrew. He never had never went to Hebrew school.
And did your parents celebrate any of the holidays when you were in Sweden?
You know what? We must have eaten with family, but it wasn't like a holiday. It wasn't specifically a holiday.
How about Yom Kippur? Would anybody fast?
Yeah, I was too young to even remember that.
And do you have any memory of going to a Rosh Hashanah service or
No,
a Pesach
no,
or
no,
no?
no. I don't think there was a synagogue.
And what was your brother's bar mitzvah like? You mentioned that it was in a clubhouse. Describe me how the bar
They
mitzvah went.
just everybody was invited. And my parents supplied the wine and the lekker cake, sponge cake, because there was nothing else. And everybody was happy, and they said l'chaim, and that was his bar mitzvah.
Did he have a talis,
No,
kippah?
no.
What kind of foods did you have in Sweden that you remember? What was your
I
usual?
remember pannkaka, which is pancakes, and the hot cross buns, and specifically to Sweden, no.
Not necessarily specifically to Sweden. In fact, the question is, how did your mother cook? Was there Swedish dishes, more Polish dishes?
You know
Jewish
what? My
dishes?
mother worked all the time, so no, definitely not Swedish dishes. It was, listen, there was a shortage of food then after the war also, so it was whatever they could get, and it was more vegetables, I guess, and we were never very strong on eating meat because we hadn't had meat in so many years.
Was there rationing in Sweden? Do you know?
I don't know.
And did you have any favorite dishes as a kid, as a young kid that you remember?
Cake. And more cake to this day.
What kind of activities? You said your mother worked a lot, but still there were weekends. What kind of activities did you do as a family?
You know what? We went to the theaters, we went to plays, we went to, I heard recitations, and very, very famous people now. I can't remember her name offhand. She wrote beautiful poetry. Her grandsons, one is a lawyer, one is a doctor, dentist here. The name will come to me. And I don't remember movies, but I do remember plays, and recitations was a big thing. People would come and read poetry and discussions, and the activities were organizations.
In what language?
Yiddish.
So that was really organized by the Jewish refugees there.
Yeah, Yiddish.
How much contact did you have, you and your parents and the Jewish refugees, with the local Swedish people?
Only neighbors and only in school or at work, but not socially. Not socially that I remember.
And there in Sweden, you learned Swedish because
Yes.
you went to Swedish nursery school. Your parents learned Swedish.
Yes.
But what was the language you spoke in the family?
At that time we spoke Polish because all the refugees spoke Polish. You know, good Polish, bad, they all spoke Polish. It was considered like intellectual, I guess.
How did you pick it up? Because you didn't speak Polish before that.
No. And I still speak Polish, even though my parents said we do not speak Polish here. But I'm certainly not fluent, but I speak, you know, the odd, I can carry a conversation.
And they spoke Polish to you in Sweden?
In Sweden, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So why did your parents not want to stay in Sweden?
I think they were concerned for us. My brother was already in high school. He had not had too much schooling before that. They didn't want him to integrate, to intermarry. And they wanted to live with Jewish people. And all the people that we lived with all left Sweden. You know, maybe the odd one stayed and moved to Stockholm, but they all left Sweden.
Did they leave before you?
many left before us, like my cousins left before us, their cousins, and Paul and I left at the same time. We were on the same ship, which I don't even remember how, but the ship was from Norway. So we went to Norway. We picked up the ship in Norway.
And why Canada? Why did you choose Canada in the end?
Because they were the first ones to say yes. And the cousins were here. So made it easier.
Tell me about the crossing. Do you know the name of the ship?
Stavangenfjorden. Did I show you the picture of the ship?
I don't think so. You can once.
Yeah.
Afterwards. So tell me about the crossing.
The crossing, I just remember that everybody was very, very sick. My mother was deathly ill. We crossed, it's a 2-week ship ride. You're crossing the Atlantic in the middle of February. We came here February the 14th. I remember just lying on the deck and just being constantly sick. I don't think my brother was sick, but we were all very sick.
Were there many Jews on the ship? You mentioned Paula Bultz.
Paula Bultz and Alice Stempler was on the ship. She was Paula's best friend. And that's the only ones that I knew. But I think most of us were sick.
Did you travel second class?
I think so.
And what year was this? You mentioned February, middle of February, but
1951.
51. And so you arrived where?
Halifax.
What's your first
February
memory?
the 14th, 1951. Halifax at that time was a coal city. They produced coal. And the snow was black. I remember getting off the ship, and Sweden was a very pristine, clean city. There wasn't much traffic because, like I said, my brother went to school on skis. And Halifax, near the docks, it was black. The snow was all black. And there was a train there, and we got on the train. And like I said, I was 7 years old. I refused to sit on the bench. The bench was brownish. It was so dirty. I took these beige brown paper towels from the bathroom, and I was cleaning all night. I was cleaning the bench before I would sit down. Even Paula remembers that. I wouldn't sit down until, anyway, it didn't help any. And then we arrived in Montreal. We arrived in Montreal to Windsor Station.
Who waited for you there?
The cousin. But I just remember we came into this huge hall in Windsor Station. I guess they went through stuff in Halifax also. We had to go through. There were tables with people sitting there going through the papers.
Did you have much luggage?
We acquired a lot of things in Sweden. So my mother had dinner sets. My mother had, when we left Sweden, the people that were left in Sweden bought my mother a gorgeous sterling silver bowl. And they bought my father a silver cigarette holder with a lapis, and for my mother a sterling compact. This was her going away present. But we came with cases and wooden cases of stuff, sheets and pillows and blankets. My mother didn't know where she was going. So from Siberia, she knew she wanted to be ready. Anyway, all this was coming on another ship, not with us. And then we had to take it out of customs, and my mother refused to take it out of customs for 9 months. It was in customs because it was so difficult for us here when we came that she wanted to go back to Sweden. And by the time it finally came, we took it out of customs. We had to open these big crates downstairs. We lived on the 3rd floor on Esplanade. We had to open everything on the street. I don't know what they thought was there. But she brought a lot of the household goods from there.
What was it? You said that it was so difficult for your mother that she was considering going back. What were her difficulties?
We couldn't find a house. We lived first with my cousin, and she had just had a baby. So she had 2, the son was 6. If I was 7, he was 6, and a new baby. There was no room for my brother. My brother went to live with my father's landsman from Poland, and it was difficult for him. No language. My mother finally got a job in a factory, and she was making $18 a week, and had a very far walk to go back and forth to the factory. She would come home to give this poor little girl lunch and go back to the factory. And we only found a house after in May, and we had to pay a lot of money, key money, to get that house. When we left my cousin's house, we rented a room. So we lived in one room, the 4 of us, till we found a house. And it was just the language, the conditions, no furniture, no anything. And the Jewish community that time was not organized or very welcoming to the people that came as refugees. On the contrary, kids were made fun of, and they were not helpful at all. My mother found the job on her own. My father didn't work for a year. He was walking the streets because his craft was in French-Canadian hands, and he didn't speak French, and he had no connection. The only people that got jobs were pressers and tailors and furriers, but not in his trade. So really, he also found a job on his own, and it was difficult. I remember it was difficult. And my brother started school that time, high school, and of course he was made fun of because of the clothing that he wore. He wore knickers when all the kids here wore long pants. And he shoveled snow on the roofs to earn the $2 tuition a month for school. And in the summer, he drove a bicycle. He rode a bicycle that sold ice cream. And he went through the streets that he knew because he knew how to ride a bicycle. And he sold ice cream. And as he got a little bit older, he worked at Miss Montreal as a waiter. And he was kind of always self-supporting, didn't want to impose on my parents.
Did your parents, when you first arrived, did they try to go to the Jewish community to get some help?
When my mother was working in the factory, she tried to get me into a camp for summertime because during the winter time I was going to school. It wasn't that difficult. And this woman was so mean.
What woman?
She had to interview us that we were refugees, that we did not have money, and she had to see the tax report. And she really was, and I've heard it from other people, to this day I remember her name, Mrs. Khan. She was, or Miss Khan. She was degrading. You know, she made us feel this small till I was allowed to go to camp for 3 weeks.
So what organization was that your mother wanted?
That was JIAS. JIAS, yeah.
And when they came, did you go to JIAS, or did they go to JIAS to help them with work or
No,
accommodation?
no. I don't think they were that productive then. Maybe later on, as people got more involved, as the refugees got more involved, we were able to help other people that came.
But you were not helped?
No, no, not at all.
How did you find, you mentioned that you moved from your cousin's place first to a double parlor?
To a double parlor, yeah.
What was the problem there? You said there was a problem there.
Well, my mother was always kosher, and there were 2 rowdy little boys were living there. And if my mother made the meat kosher, she came home one day, and the meat was cleaning the floors. So anyway, and we were paying $55 a month rent for the room, and they were paying $30 a month rent for the whole house. And we were there February, March, April, and then we found a place on Esplanade near Villeneuve. And my parents had friends that lived on Esplanade across from Mount Royal, and it was so pretty then. You know, even now it's beautiful. And I used to tell my mother all the time, this is where I want to move, this is where I want to move. But of course, we moved 2 blocks further than that.
So you didn't get a view of the mountain?
No.
Beyond
we lived on Esplanade between Mount Royal and St. Joseph.
What kind of who did you rent it from?
We rented it from the Stearns. They lived in the middle. And downstairs, I don't know if you heard, Barbara Seal, the judge, Barbara Schultz, she lived downstairs, and her father was a musician with the orchestra. The Stearns were very Orthodox, and their son, who was later in school with me in Barambing, became a rabbi, and he lives in Israel. And Barbara became a judge downstairs, and we lived on the top floor. So we stayed there for a few years. And
describe this apartment to me.
So because we were upstairs, we had a balcony, and then there was a little room off the balcony, which was over the staircase. And then my parents had a bedroom, and there was a little kitchen with a stove, a coal stove, and the dining room. And off the dining room was another room, which we always rented out. We always had a boarder that lived with us because we were never able to afford all the rent ourselves. And I became very friendly with the boarder's daughter, and it was on the 3rd floor. The stairs we were all young, so the stairs were not a problem. And it was like everybody else lived. Nothing fancy, and, you know, slowly we bought furniture, and my mother had in the room that was over the balcony, next to the balcony over the stairs, my father bought her a sewing machine. So she took in work from the factory. After dinner, she would sew, and she got clients also that she would sew for. And the whole street was mainly all Jewish. So we all became very, very friendly, and helping each other out, and then, you know, in every way.
Where did you sleep? In that little room where there was the sewing?
No, that was my brother's room.
So where did you sleep?
I'm trying to remember. There must have been maybe another room, I don't know.
And And you always had a border,
We always had a
not
border.
border, but
Yeah.
a family, or?
Yeah, we always had a border. If one moved out, another one moved in.
But these were families, because you mentioned that you got friendly with the daughter.
No. It was a man who was divorced, and his daughter would come to visit. And one time it was a family with a child that came from Paris. And when my uncle came from Israel, he lived with us. And there was, even when we moved to Park Avenue, there was always a boarder in the house. And my mother never wanted a woman boarder because they mess up the kitchen. The men usually don't cook, but this one cooked.
So they cooked themselves for themselves,
Yeah,
or you fed them?
No, they cooked for themselves.
Your mother worked, you said she worked a lot, so
Yeah.
who did the housework?
My mother.
She did as well?
Yeah, my mother. And then when I was about 12 years old, we had moved already to another house. And my father had an accident. He had started his own business already. He had an accident. He fell off a roof. And of course, he had no insurance, and there was no Medicare. And he was in a hospital bed at home for a year. And my mother worked. My brother would go to my father's shop. There was no answering machines. I don't know if there was an answering service, and if there was, we couldn't afford it. My brother would stay in the shop Friday after school and all day Saturday if anybody called to do work. And if he was able to get some work done, then my father had a friend who became friends with him here, Max Franenberg. And Max would pretend that he was sick and come to do the work for my father. And of course, my father paid him for it, but it kept the name of the shop going. And I became very close with his son, Louis. And we were always very, very thankful for him. He was a wonderful man.
Going back a little bit to your beginnings here, you said that your mother wanted to leave. Did your father agree with her, or?
Probably, yes. Yeah.
And what made her change her mind finally after 9 months?
I think things got a little bit easier. Maybe my father got a job and things got a little bit better. And once she had her own blankets and her things, and she felt a little bit better. Maybe she made more friends. They joined the worker circle, and it just got a little bit better.
Did she have any friends? Well, you had the cousin here and that family.
Yeah.
Did she have any friends from Sweden? Because I guess some people came here.
Yeah. They stayed in touch. Paula's parents, Alice's parents. Those were from Sweden, and people that she met here, and people that we met here that they knew from Poland or from Russia, that came here however which way.
Did they meet any non-refugee Jews? I mean, to become friendly with?
Not really. My father maybe through work, but his work was all in French. Not really. They belong to the Jewish organizations here. They belong to Worker Circle. They had the same lifestyle that they had in Sweden. They went to plays, the organizations, very Zionistic. When we had that extra room, the shlichim that they sent from Israel, there was always a shaliach living in our house too. I must have slept in my parents' bedroom, I don't know. Until my brother got married, I got my own room. But there was always somebody else in our house.
Beside the border?
Besides the border, with the border, there was always...
Did they belong to a synagogue, your parents?
Not then, no.
Okay.
But there was a synagogue across the. You didn't have to belong then to a synagogue. There was a Stiebel synagogue right across the street. So, and a few families that were very religious across the street. And one of them, she just took me under her wings and took me to, Shabbat. She would take me with her and teach me. And because we didn't have money to go to a private school. And when we crossed over on the ship, my mother became very good friends with a Rebbetzin. And they stayed good friends. And I was in touch with the two daughters for many, many, many years. And my daughter, when she lived in New York, I see a man in her elevator, and very orthodox. They're not supposed to speak to me. And I mentioned the name, if he's in touch, because I knew the sons and one daughter moved to New York. So I mentioned the name, that I know this and this person. And he immediately on his cell phone called him. And he says, "Did you come from Norway on a ship?" And he says, he couldn't believe, because he didn't know this story. He was younger than me, this little boy then. And anyway, we spoke, but I never met him. But his sisters I used to see here in Montreal.
Did your, I know your family wasn't too religious, did they do, she was kosher, your mother? So
Yeah.
Your household was kosher?
Yeah, we did all the holidays.
Yeah?
Yeah, we did all the holidays. Once we were here, we did all the holidays.
So you did learn all that from?
Well, my parents sent me afterwards to afternoon school. I went to Avram Raisin School, which was not a religious school, it was a secular school. So
what did you learn there?
We learned to read and to write, and about Jewish authors, about the holidays, but not to pray, not to,
So more traditions.
More tradition, because it was part of the Arbeitering, the worker circle.
So it was in Yiddish?
It was in Yiddish, yeah.
Your memories when you first arrived in Montreal, your first impressions as a little girl?
It was dirty, dirty, dirty. The first couple of, when we lived with the cousin, they lived in Park X. I didn't go to school. I went to school on Edward VII, but that was, I don't know, not even for a month, I don't think. So on the street, I became friends with Clara Bidner, who also spoke Yiddish, but I was not happy. I felt very uncomfortable in the school. Then after we moved to Esplanade, it was better.
Why was that you felt so uncomfortable in Edward VII?
Because I didn't speak the language. I didn't understand anything. I didn't know anybody. And I was a little bit older. I was already 7 years old. So I felt uncomfortable. When we moved to Esplanade, I started Bancroft School. And most of the kids that I met along the way were all refugee kids. So we all felt a little bit more comfortable with each other.
You mentioned two
friends. Yeah.
So tell me that story.
Anyways, the first day that I started school, I'm walking towards Villeneuve to walk to school. We walked by ourselves. Our parents didn't take us to school because they were working. And I see this girl walking. She looks at me and I look at her. We don't have a common language. And then a boy comes up, and we were all 7, 8 years old. And she spoke French and I spoke Swedish. And he came, from Belgium, so he spoke French. And we realized we have a common language, Yiddish. And we became friends. We became very, very good friends from that day on. And I didn't tell you one other thing. I reminded myself. So my friend Simon, we were in grade 4, and we had a Jewish teacher. And we didn't know, but the law at the time, the teachers have to teach a half hour of studies, religious studies. So it started with the Lord's Prayer. No, it started with I pledge allegiance to the flag first, then the Lord's Prayer, and then we had hymns. So one day they taught us something from the Bible. But this particular teacher insisted that we sing, Jesus Loves Me. So one day Simon and I, in grade 4, organized a strike. We're not going to sing Jesus Loves Me. There's a lot to teach about religion besides Jesus Loves Me. So I was sent to the principal's office. He was sent to the vice principal. I don't know what happened to him. But the principal looked at me, looked at my name, and my name is Rothenberg. And he says, oh, you must have come from Germany. There's a very famous city in Germany by the name of Rothenburg. I said, yes. So I was sent. I wasn't punished. The silly stories you remember, eh?
You said that many of the children that you met at Bancroft were refugees.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine Jewish refugees.
Yes.
So tell me about your classmates. What was the proportion of Jews and non-Jews in the school?
As far as I remember, most of them were Jewish. Even in Barmbing, most of them were Jewish. Barmbing was established as a school for, at that time, for refugee kids before my time, because they didn't want the Jewish kids integrated. They wanted to keep the Jewish kids separate. And to their big, big surprise, that these kids that came with nothing succeeded very much in life. They became judges, Nobel Prize laureates, teachers, doctors, physicists, chemists, and they, in the most part, they did very, very well. And this is not what they thought would happen. And we had I had some wonderful, wonderful teachers. I had a few Jewish teachers. I had a few Jewish teachers that they were the first woman teachers that were allowed into Jewish school, into school to study to become a teacher.
Can you tell me some names?
Miss Finkelstein, Frances, what was her second name? She was very colorful. Miss Clark, Miss Finkelstein, Miss Pinsky used to make us sing Jesus Loves Me. Miss Smolkin, and Miss Katz, a very colorful, wonderful female teacher in high school.
Going back to still Bancroft, most of the children were Jewish. Were there non-refugee Jews in your class?
Yes.
So
yes.
How was the relationship?
Because the neighborhood was mixed. The neighborhood. Well, my closest friend Miriam was a refugee. My next closest friend Sandra was a Canadian, and Mildred was Canadian. You know, at that point we just integrated.
But you did mention that your brother had a lot of difficulties at the beginning.
My brother came in high school. It was a little bit more difficult for him.
But I heard other refugees tell me how they felt a little out of place in the school. Did you have that experience? Even in terms of clothing or the language?
You know what? I didn't have it in clothing because my mother made my clothes. So I didn't have it in clothing. I had it in language. And you just felt different. You felt that I was close friends, mainly with refugee kids. Or I was most comfortable. My brother made all different kinds of friends because he worked afterwards in a pharmaceuticals, so it was all Anglos, and he integrated very well, spoke without an accent. Like I said, he was very, very, very intelligent.
Well, when you say that you felt different from them, can you pinpoint what that difference was as for a little girl?
I don't think, and I still don't think, that they understand us. I still don't. My closest friend now, Sandra, I've been friends with her for 70 years. When I tell her something, I can see that it doesn't go. It doesn't go. And if I would tell Paula something, I don't have to finish. She understands. They don't understand what doing without is. I mean, if I would tell my friend Rhoda that we didn't have, we didn't have either. We had ration cards. Well, your father was a butcher. You always had food to eat. I mean, I don't remember, my father would come from work and my mother would come from work, and it would be a tomato and a cucumber and a piece of herring. But I don't remember feasting on meat in those days because we couldn't afford it. So it was not something that I really grew up with. But they don't understand that. And especially to my friend Rhoda, because my mother sewed my clothes, we were always rich. Always rich. So there was always, I just felt there was always a kind of incredibility and an envy. That all of us came with money, with bushels and barrels of money.
Did you get any kind of mocking at the beginning in Bancroft?
Not so much in Bancroft, because we were more kids in Bancroft than in Edward VII.
You mean more refugee kids?
Yeah, we were more refugee kids, and they were Jewish teachers.
What was the language, your common language with the other children?
It became English. I don't know how I picked it up so quickly. We all spoke English afterwards. I mean, I lost my Swedish completely. Simon and Miriam speak fluent French. But the Swedish was not I remember sitting in a restaurant in Israel with my husband, and he's very good in languages. And these people are sitting next to me, and I'm kind of understanding what they're saying. So I asked him, "Do you understand what they're saying?" He says, "Not a word." I realized they were speaking Swedish, but I really don't understand it anymore.
Did you made friends with other refugee kids? What did you do together? Did you go to each other's homes?
We did, yeah. We went to each other's homes. We made parties in homes. Whatever, our entertainment, our best entertainment was going for a walk. I mean, there was no television, so it was walking. There was the Y.
What did you do in the Y? Yeah.
We had clubs in the Y. The Y became a little bit later because at that time it was $6 membership, which was a lot of money. And there was Neighborhood House, which I think was free, which was wonderful. So there were clubs, there were dances, there were Children under 16 were not allowed into movies in Montreal because there had been a big fire and it's my phone. A lot of kids got hurt. So I remember sneaking in, pretending that I was 16. I was 13 when I went to my first movie. Yeah. We went skating. We went to the mountain a lot. And I don't know, we just hang out. We talked.
Tell me about Neighborhood House, because a few people mentioned that.
Neighborhood. It was on Clark Street. It was a house with different rooms, I guess. But they had counselors. And one of the men that was leading it was actually my swim instructor at camp. So it was a place that I think the kids miss today. It was a place to go, to be comfortable, to be safe with kids your age. And you danced, or you talked about books, or you had a book review. There was always something going on. And at the Y too. The Y used to have social dancing every Sunday. And kids came from all over the city, to get together.
What age are we talking about when you were between what age and what age?
From 13 to 16, let's say. Because we didn't go skiing, we couldn't afford it. We went skating Friday night. There's a park on Bloomfield, and they had outdoor skating. I don't know if you've ever been there. There's a theater there. That's where I first snuck into the theater. I paid, but I pretended I was 16. So they have a little hut there. You put on your skates, and they played music. And we would go Friday night in the winter after dinner, after Shabbat dinner. We went skating. So we had a very nice social life. And we would go to each other's houses and just, my friend Sandra had a TV, so we went to her house. And we watched TV sometimes on the corner of Villeneuve and Esplanade. There was a Eric Television. He had a TV in the window. So we'd stand at night and watch TV. And the big entertainment was, after Rosh Hashanah, after the Seders, everybody would walk up and down Park Avenue. That was the biggest entertainment. And go from synagogue to synagogue.
Young people or adults?
Everybody. Yeah.
You said that you'll talk a little bit more about the Bar Bing High School and the story of the school, so I'm giving you the opportunity.
You know what? It was a great school for immigrant kids. It was started for the wrong reasons, but it kept us all together. And for my grade especially, and it's over 60 years, we still get together twice a year. Whoever's in Florida, they get together, and whoever's in Montreal gets together. So sadly to say, a lot of people are not here, but we communicate. We call each other to see how we're doing, and not necessarily refugee kids, all the kids.
It was a public school.
It was a public school.
Were there any non-Jews there, or?
Oh yeah. I was friends with a guy that came from Germany, Wolfgang. So, but we had Arab friends, Koori, Chinese friends. The last reunion was very funny because I was on the organizing committee and everybody's very cliquey. So they sat down together and I felt that I should sit with people that don't know, that are coming in. Not everybody knows each other. So I sat with 3 Chinese couples, and one of them said to me, you know, the fortune cookies from the Chinese restaurant? He says, look at it. There's a little sign. It says kosher. He doesn't say kosher. He says kosher in Yiddish. He said, I make those cookies. So it was very, you know, like I said, we stay in touch, and Harry donates hats and mugs and, you know.
But did you have friends in high school among the non-Jews, or did the non-Jews kept to themselves and the Jews kept to themselves and the refugees kept to themselves and the Montreal
There weren't that many non-Jews. So I don't think it was specifically done, but I don't remember many non-Jews that we were friends with. It wouldn't have made it wouldn't have made a difference.
And did you feel a divide between the European refugee
Yes.
kids and the...
Yes. There was more divide between that than I think with Chinese or Arab or non-Jews. Because I think there was always, I don't know, maybe it was my imagination, but reading that book, The Shtetl, everybody felt that resentment. There was always, like, we took their jobs and we took their positions, and we're accelerating in school, so they can't accelerate in school. And it was, it was just felt. And I've been friends with a woman since I'm 13 years old. And last year I said, I'm not even bothering anymore. Because after so many years, to still feel, that there's a resentment because we're Maquis, as they called us. So,
did you experience any anti-Semitism growing up here?
I did when I went to Hebrew school, to Yiddish school, after school. And it was at Workman Circle. And it was on St. Lawrence Street. It was in the middle of the block. And if I had to go home and it was at night after school, it was dark. St. Joseph at that time was a beautiful boulevard with these huge, huge trees. So it was very dark. And I was little. I was afraid. So a friend of mine, Mottel Forspan, he lived on the other side of St. Joseph. So I would pray every day that he should come to school. And I was friends with his cousin, so she always teased me. He was very handsome. She always teased me that I had a crush on him. I said, I love him to bits as long as he comes to school. And if I went home the other way, the French kids used to chase me. So I was always afraid to go home through Villeneuve because I got chased and shouted at. But other than that, in school I didn't feel anything. That was the only place really that I felt anti-Semitism. I think my brother felt it more because he was working part-time, he was meeting with other people, and
later in life, as an adult, did you come across any?
Not really, because we worked with French people. We worked in Cornwall, we worked in Hawkesbury, we worked in Halifax. You're working with different people, and I'm sure they look at us a little bit differently, and we look at them not because they're different or we're different, because we don't know each other. There's not that close connection.
After high school, what did you do? Where did you go?
Well, I went to McGill Teachers College, and that was, at that time, in St. Anne de Bellevue, which was very, very difficult. It was difficult because I didn't want to burden my parents to pay for me to rent a room there. So we managed, three of us managed to find a student who had a car, and we paid him to take us to school because we had to be there on time. But home, 99% of the time we would hitchhike. And a lot of our classes, we had nothing between 2:30 till 4:30. And the last class was 4:30 to 6:30. Pitch dark in the winter, you're afraid to hitchhike. And so that part was hard. I did okay. I got a terrific job. And I was the only one of all my friends that got Verdun as a school. Everybody got Snowden, Coronation School, schools around the area. I got Verdun, and I got married soon after school. My husband had to drive me to school, and it was impossible. There was no public transportation. I did not drive, and there I had anti-Semitism. I was the youngest one there, and it was the time of the Eichmann trial. And every time I would walk in, they would look at what I'm having for lunch. That's Jewish food. I mean, I never knew my food was different. And I did not feel welcome. I was not happy. I was not happy in this school. I befriended one girl. She was a little bit older, the only one that was not much older. And we went out for lunch, and she ordered a pork chop and a glass of milk. And I thought, it turned my stomach. And fortunately, I became pregnant, and the doctor told me, you can't work there anymore.
Were you the only Jew in the school?
I was the only Jewish school, the only person. They never knew a Jew before. And most of the principal was somebody that I had met in college, and he had been kicked out for cheating. And yet he got a job as being the principal, and the other female teachers were ready to retire. That's why they were trying to recruit younger teachers. It was not a happy situation. So I stopped.
How did you meet your husband?
That was a crazy story, and my husband, I'm sure, gave you another story.
You tell your version, please.
Oh, I'll tell you my version. Okay, my version, I knew this girl from high school. I was not friends with her, but we knew each other, and I knew that she was a refugee kid. And my parents were invited to her wedding. And I was invited to the wedding, and first of all, I had school on Saturday, so I couldn't go to the wedding. And she was not a friend. I didn't feel, so my parents, like all refugees, my parents said, if we were invited to the wedding, obviously they don't have any other family to invite to the wedding. So they went to the wedding, they had a wonderful time, whatever. And like I said, I was going to school and hitchhiking home. So there was one Saturday that I came home a little bit earlier. We had school on Saturday, and we had to fight with the school board that we didn't want to write exams on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it was not easy. And my mother bought a little gift, and I called her, I'll come to visit her. So I went to visit her, and I stayed there for a little bit. But I had nothing in common with her because we were not friends. So I said, okay, I'm going to leave. So she said, you can't leave now. My husband's coming home soon. You didn't come to the wedding. You have to meet my husband.
So sorry, you said that she said, oh, you didn't come to the wedding, you have to meet my husband.
Yeah. So Her husband, I didn't know at the time, her husband was working as a salesman for my husband, and he in turn told him that you haven't seen my husband since the wedding. Come upstairs just to see my apartment. So he came up, and we met. And like I said, they were not friends of mine. And my husband looks at me and he says to me, "What are you doing later?" And this was Saturday. I mean, no girls caught Saturday without a date. And of course I had a date. And I looked at him and I said, "Nothing." So I broke the date. He says, "Okay, I'm going home to shower and change, and then I'll come back to get you." So that's how we met.
Tell me his name, so we have it on your tape as well.
Harry Zvi Langbert.
And where he was born.
He was born in Poland.
So you got married, you got pregnant. How many kids do you have?
We have 4 children, 4 wonderful, wonderful children. And
Names?
Aaron, for my uncle and for Zvi's uncle. And Michael Israel for my 2 uncles. And Sherry for my Aunt Sarah. Sherry is Sherry Dvora. So she's for my 2 aunts, my mother's sister and my father's sister. And together we have 12 grandchildren and 1 beautiful little great-granddaughter. Yeah.
When the children were growing up, what kind of Jewish life did you have in the family?
Well, I always kept kosher. Shortly after we were married, my husband's mother passed away. I had already the 2 kids, so my father-in-law moved in with me, and he lived with us for 10 years. So it was always, Shabbat was Shabbat. And I mean, my father-in-law went to synagogue, but he never pushed it on us. We went during the holidays, and every holiday was a holiday. We celebrated together with my parents, his dad, my brother, and whoever came. His sisters would come from the States, so we were always together.
Did your children go to Jewish school?
They went to Hebrew school, they went to Talmud Torah, and they were pretty much fluent in Hebrew. They all went to Israel. They're very upset with what's going on now. My daughter is beside herself. My daughter moved to New York, and she felt she wants to be a little bit more, I don't know, maybe cosmopolitan, maybe because we live in a bubble in Montreal. And she moved into a neighborhood that is not Jewish, became friends with all the neighbors and with kids from school. And last week she had a terrible, terrible incident. She went out with a couple and that they traveled with and were friends, and the kids are friends. And at the end of dinner, the husband turned around and said that the fault of the war is Israel, because Israel are the terrorists, because they have an army. They train an army to kill. And she just walked out and will not have anything to do with them. I believe she answered them. Excuse me. That was very, very difficult for her. Very difficult.
How much, both you and your husband are survivors, how much did you share this with your children growing up, and how much did they ask?
I don't know if they asked. The hurts for my parents, maybe. They hurt a lot more. My second son is married. She was a friend of mine that we went to high school together with their daughter. but her husband was a survivor of Auschwitz. So he spoke a lot more about his experience. And it kind of overshadows anything that we have to say. But my youngest granddaughter went on the March of the Living last year. And my son is married to a non-Jewish girl. And she chose to have a bat mitzvah in Israel. Didn't tell anybody. So very proud of her. And we talk a little bit, but not enough. I think I'm talking more now.
But when they were younger, would this be something that would be discussed at the dinner table on Shabbat and special occasions?
Sorry.
So the question was whether there were any occasions, dinners, special occasions when they were children talking about.
Yeah, maybe sometimes when my parents were over or with my father-in-law, but not, when it was Yom HaShoah. I mean, my kids always came with us, and in school, of course, they learn about it because they went to Hebrew school. But
how about with Harry, your husband? Is this something that the two of you talk about, or have talked about over the years?
Only if it comes up, not. But obviously, we both felt more comfortable because I dated boys that were not Holocaust survivors, but my closest friends were still Holocaust survivors. My boyfriends were Holocaust survivors. Whether from Germany or from... I had somebody that I went to school with spoke in Toronto at a synagogue. He came from the States, he's a rabbi, and he went to Barambane with us and spoke at a synagogue. And somebody living in Toronto went to hear him speak. He recognized the name and went to hear him speak. We never, as kids, we never ever talked between us about anything. Not with Miriam, not with Simon, not with anybody. So these two fellows recognized each other, and the speech that he gave was, he was born in Auschwitz. And the other guy went over to him after everybody was and said, "Do you remember me, 60 years later?" He said, "I was also born in Auschwitz." But all through school, nobody ever knew.
Have you been involved with Holocaust-related activities in your life?
Yeah, always.
Tell me about that.
Well, originally they asked me, I don't know if originally, but at one point they asked me to do interviews, and I just found that very difficult. Then I started volunteering at the Holocaust Center when it was still in Côte-des-Neiges. And then they moved to Côte St. Catherine. And then I worked with Hannah on Kristallnacht and with Sydney and Sarah on Yom HaShoah. And I was very involved and then I was told, well, you can't be on two committees, you can only be on one committee. So I was put on Kristallnacht, which is very inactive. And I was told I can't be on Yom HaShoah. So I haven't been doing anything.
My bad. How do you feel that the Holocaust or your experiences with that and your parents influence your life? In what ways?
I think we're sensitive to a certain degree. I think we're more cautious, less trusting maybe, and I don't know, maybe a little bit overprotective. We try to do our best I always tell my kids I try to do the best with what I can, with my intelligence, with my ability. I try to do my best. I'm not perfect.
Is there anything else you would like to add? Anything I didn't ask? Anything you find important?
You can ask anything you like.
No, but is there anything I didn't ask and you still want to add or want to include in this interview?
I'll probably remember it all after you leave, as everybody else.
You said that I wouldn't mind if we could like show on camera a few pictures. So you tell me where they are, or you need to get up.
Okay, in the office. You can ask my husband's the picture of my parents
Okay.
in Warsaw.
Okay. It's in the office.
Yeah. Okay, these are my parents walking down the street in Warsaw. And as you see, pre-war, they were very elegantly dressed for the time. My mother with her hat and my father with the pants that were very stylish.
Tilt it a little bit because yeah. No.
It's okay?
Because it's
It's a glass. No?
But are they scanned? Do you know if we scan them? No.
No, this
So
one,
I will
no.
probably ask for that
Okay.
afterwards.
This is in Sweden. This is in Sweden. My mother, my father, my brother,
And you.
and me, of course. It doesn't show here that I really have blonde hair, but I was blonde. Highlights. I have pictures over there with me and my mother like this on the table there.
I will bring it first.
This is me and my father, 1947.
Where?
1947, we must have been, and this one is 1946. 1946 and 47 must have been the DP camp. Yeah. So the style then was to have this beautiful ribbon in your hair.
In these old photos, everybody's so dressed so nicely.
Yeah, yeah. And this coat, I remember, was very, very beautiful. That's the one that's painted in the other painting. And then we gave it to my cousin. You know what? This must have been in DP camp also, because I'm wearing the same dress. This is my mother and me.
I know you said you had photos from Sweden, where with Paula's brother.
Yes.
Remember? Yeah. Where's that?
As you turn the corner, it's not in a frame, it's standing loose on the table, the first table. You know, when we moved here, I packed everything. My husband had had surgery before. So I have a bin with all pictures. This is nursery school in Sweden. And my friend Paula's brother is sitting next to me. His name is Sam Minsky. And next to me on the other side is Chaim Adler.
You have to tell us which one you are.
I am right here.
Put your hand. Okay.
I'm the only one who's wearing that hairdo.
The one sitting or in the back?
The one sitting here in the back.
Okay. There. Okay. Do you remember? Like, what do you remember of this nursery school?
I don't remember the school at all. At all, because it doesn't say what year it was. But obviously I didn't have language yet then. I didn't have the
Swedish.
yeah. So, I mean, looks like I'm painting. I have no recollection.
Okay.
I do remember the hospital and the very wise doctor. But
That was traumatic. I guess that's why I
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. when they stick a pipe in your mouth,
Yeah.
and I remember the Santa Lucia part because, you know, you're wearing this long white gown with candles on your head.
Okay, so I think that's all the photos. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you. Thank you.